Hello and welcome to Last Records. Today I'm covering Karens across South America whose very last complaint turned out to be the one they couldn't walk away from. From a Karen dangling 60 feet up on her custom-made safety harness to a Karen who laughed at a lifeguard trying to save her, unaware things were about to end brutally. It was March 14th, 2018, and the morning mist was just starting to burn off above a canopy tour operation set into the side of a forested ridge outside a small city in Colombia's coffee region, where a wooden platform roughly 60 feet above the valley floor served as the launch point for a series of cables strung between the trees. Chelsea Hargrove was 38 years old and worked as a real estate agent in Scottsdale, Arizona. She was on a vacation with two girlfriends, a week-long trip they had been planning for months, and the canopy tour was supposed to be the highlight of the whole trip. Her friends later said Chelsea was the type of person who sent food back at basically every restaurant they went to, not because there was anything actually wrong with it, but because she always found something. One friend described a dinner the year before where Chelsea literally made the waiter come back 4 times over the temperature of a steak and then left a 1-star review before they even made it to the car. On this particular morning, she had already complained about the shuttle van being too warm on the drive up, sent her lunch plate back at the lodge because the rice was undercooked, and gotten into it with a staff member about the fit of her helmet before they even reached the first platform. The harness was just the next thing on the list, and honestly, that's the biggest thing that's been bothering me this whole time, because for her, this wasn't just some unusual moment, it was just another day of complaints, and the complaint this time just happened to be the wrong one. The canopy operation used a commercial zipline harness system with adjustable waist and leg straps designed to keep riders securely positioned during the crossing. Before each rider launched, an operator on the platform checked the fit and tightened everything to the correct tension. When Chelsea's turn came, she pretty much immediately told the operator the waist strap was digging into her hips and she wanted it loosened. The operator, a local man in his 20s who had worked the platforms for 3 seasons, explained in limited English that the harness needed to be snug for safety. Chelsea told him it was too tight and she wasn't going anywhere until he fixed it. Her friend said she basically got louder, brought up leaving a review, and made sure he knew she wasn't messing around. The operator gave in and loosened the waist strap, and then he loosened the upper leg straps too, after she said those were also pinching. Like, tell me how in the world you're supposed to say no to someone like that when she's standing on your platform refusing to move until she gets what she wants. She launched from the platform on the longest cable span of the course, roughly 400 feet across a valley gap, with the ground 60 feet below. About halfway across, her body started shifting down in the loosened harness. Like the straps that were supposed to keep her in place just had too much slack, and her hips and thighs kinda slid right through. Her weight dropped below the attachment point. She slid out of the harness feet first. Witnesses on the opposite platform saw her separate from the harness and fall. The drop was roughly 60 feet onto a mix of exposed rock and dense undergrowth on the valley slope below. There was no sound from the group on either platform for several seconds. 2 guides descended by rope from the nearest platform. She was found unresponsive in the brush roughly 30 feet below the cable line. They radioed for help, but the rescue crews had to get there on foot through the terrain, and it took them like 45 minutes. She was pronounced dead on scene. A forensic examination later determined the cause of death to be catastrophic blunt force trauma from a fall at height, with multiple fractures to the skull, spine, and pelvis. The loosened waist and leg straps were documented as the primary contributing factor. I can't get it out of my head that the exact adjustment she demanded is what let her fall, and nobody on that platform could talk her out of it because she'd already made up her mind. The investigation cleared the operator, noting that he had adjusted the harness under pressure from the client after repeated demands. The canopy company implemented dual operator fit verification procedures and added secondary retention checks before each launch. Chelsea's friends gave their statements and flew home to Arizona. The social media post they took on the platform like 10 minutes before the launch ended up in the incident file. This next one is from a video that made me the angriest during my research because the person she talked down to was literally trying to save her life, and she treated him like he was some kid who didn't know what he was talking about. It was January 7th, 2017. And the late morning sun was already pushing temperatures into the low 90s along a popular stretch of urban beach in a coastal city in northeastern Brazil, where red warning flags snapped in the onshore wind at intervals along the sand, and a lifeguard station sat on an elevated wooden platform near the main access point. Irasema Cavalcanti was 54 years old and had spent her entire career as a school administrator in the same coastal city, retiring 2 years earlier after nearly 3 decades in the public education system. Since retirement, she had basically built her whole morning routine around the beach. Same spot every day, same towel placement, same umbrella angle, same time of arrival. Her daughter later said Irasema referred to the beach as hers, and she genuinely wasn't joking when she said it. She acted like the stretch of sand in front of her umbrella was basically her personal property. She was known for arguing over seating at nearby cafes and had once spent 10 minutes at a breakfast counter insisting a family move so she could have the table she considered hers. That's kind of the thing with people like this, right? They don't back down because nobody ever makes them back down. And after enough years of getting their way, I genuinely think they just stop believing the rules apply to them. That morning, Irasema arrived at her usual time and found red flags posted along the beach with conditions marked as dangerous. A lifeguard, a man in his early 20s who had been working the station for about 2 years, approached her near the waterline and warned her not to enter the water due to strong rip currents. Irasema told him she had been swimming at this beach since before he was born, basically said the flags were for tourists who didn't know the water. The lifeguard repeated the warning and asked her to stay on the sand. She just waved him off and walked into the surf without looking back. She waded past knee depth, then waist depth, moving with the kind of confidence that kinda only comes from doing something 1,000 times without anything going wrong. The lifeguard watched from the shoreline, whistle in hand. Another beachgoer who saw the whole thing said she literally didn't even glance back at him. Within roughly 2 minutes of entering the water, a rip current caught her at chest depth and began pulling her past the brake line. She went from standing to struggling in seconds. Her arms came up, but her body was already moving sideways and out. The lifeguard entered the water immediately, sprinting from the sand into the surf. By the time he reached the area where she had been standing, she was already roughly 40 feet offshore. He swam toward her, but the current pushed him off her line. A second lifeguard launched a rescue board from the station and paddled out. They reached her roughly 6 minutes after she entered the water. She was face down and unresponsive. They pulled her onto the board and brought her back to shore. CPR was started on the beach by the lifeguard team. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes. Resuscitation continued for over 30 minutes. She was pronounced dead on the beach. A forensic examination later determined the cause of death to be drowning, with the rip current documented as the direct mechanism. The lifeguard did everything right here, warned her, went in after her, put his own safety on the line for someone who had just dismissed him to his face, and it still wasn't enough. And honestly, I keep wondering how he moves past that. The lifeguard was cleared in the investigation. The beach authority expanded signage along that stretch and added a second staffed station for high-risk conditions. Irasema's daughter gave a brief statement to local media where she pretty much described her mother as someone who just never believed anything bad could happen to her at her own beach. Alright, so this next one is different from the others because she didn't ignore a warning from a stranger this time, she ignored the warning from her own body, and I think that's somehow even worse. It was August 22nd, 2019, and a 12-seat tour bus climbed a gravel switchback road above the tree line in the Bolivian Altiplano, where the air was thin enough to feel in your chest with every breath, and the brown and gold landscape stretched flat to the horizon under a sky so blue it almost looked fake. Bryn McAllister was 41 years old and owned a boutique fitness studio in Calgary, Canada, the kind with branded water bottles and motivational slogans on the walls. She was lean, disciplined, and very publicly fit, the type of person whose whole identity was pretty much built around her body. Tour group members said Bryn told basically everyone at the airport that she was training for her 3rd marathon. And on the bus ride to the first hotel, she asked the guide how many of the group were in decent shape, and then answered her own question by listing her resting heart rate and weekly running mileage like it was a resume. When several members of the group took altitude medication they had brought for the trip, Bryn waved it off and said she didn't put chemicals in her body. 2 other group members accepted their tablets quietly. She made sure everyone knew she was the one person who didn't need them. She didn't just say no, she made a whole production out of it, so every person in that van knew she was above needing help. And in my experience, that kind of confidence only ever goes one direction. Day 1, at roughly 11,000 feet, she was fine, energetic, talkative, no visible symptoms. She did a short hike with the group that afternoon and was honestly near the front the whole time, though that night she mentioned that she hadn't slept great and felt kinda nauseous, which she blamed on the food, of course. The group went higher on day 2, got to just over 13,000 feet by late morning. By early afternoon, Bryn had this headache she brought up once and then kinda just stopped mentioning. She also looked slightly unsteady during a stop at a viewpoint, leaning against the railing in a way another traveler noticed. By late afternoon, she had slowed considerably on a short walk from the bus to a lookout, stopping twice to catch her breath on what was basically flat ground. The guide checked on her and she said she was just tired from the altitude and would be fine after some rest. She didn't come down for dinner. The guide went to check on her room like 30 minutes after dinner and found her just sitting on the edge of her bed, clearly confused and honestly not able to answer even simple questions. Her coordination was poor, her speech was slurred, and she couldn't follow simple instructions to stand or walk toward the door. When the guide asked her to squeeze his hand, she didn't seem to understand the request. He pretty much knew right away what was happening and called emergency services. She was transported by ambulance to a lower altitude hospital roughly 2 hours away. By the time she arrived, the swelling in her brain had progressed significantly despite emergency treatment and descent to lower altitude. She was placed on oxygen and monitored through the night, but her condition kept deteriorating. She never regained full consciousness. She died the following morning. A forensic examination later determined the cause of death to be high-altitude cerebral edema, which is basically when your brain swells from lack of oxygen at elevation, and once it gets past a certain point, even getting to lower ground can't reverse the damage. Investigators noted the guide had recommended altitude medication during the pre-trip briefing, which she declined, and that early symptoms were present on day 2, but she didn't report them until it was too late. The guide's documentation of her refusal and her stated reason were included in the incident file. The tour company expanded its altitude screening procedures and strengthened pre-trip medical briefings for high-altitude routes. Her fitness studio put up a short memorial on social media, and honestly, her marathon training page was still live months later. I've been going back and forth on this one because on paper, she did everything right. She called ahead, drove 5 hours, had the whole thing planned out, and then reality didn't match, and she just couldn't let it go. It was November 3rd, 2015, and a cold wind pushed low clouds across the eastern face of a mountain range in Argentine Patagonia, where a gravel parking lot at a trailhead sat mostly empty except for a park ranger's vehicle and a dusty silver SUV with Mendoza plates. Valentina Arriaga was 47 years old and worked as a civil engineer in Mendoza, Argentina. She was super fit and precise, kinda treated hiking the same way she treated her engineering work. Everything planned down to the detail and zero patience for anything that went off script. Her husband later said she had called the park office the day before to confirm the trail was open. They drove 5 hours specifically for this route and booked a hotel nearby. When they arrived at the trailhead and a ranger told them the trail was closed due to recent landslide activity, Valentina pulled out her phone and called the park's regional office from the parking lot while the ranger stood right there watching her do it. The call didn't change anything, but she stayed on it for almost 15 minutes trying to get someone higher up. Her husband said she was convinced the closure was basically a formality and that the trail itself was fine because she had researched conditions online the week before. I've been going back and forth on this one because on paper, she did everything right. She called ahead, drove 5 hours, had the whole thing planned out, and then reality didn't match, and she just couldn't let it go. The ranger reiterated the closure and returned to his vehicle. Valentina and her husband continued past the barrier on foot. Her husband later said she was walking well ahead of him on the closed section, moving quickly with her phone out, checking a trail map she had downloaded before the trip. He said he called to her twice to slow down, but she didn't respond. The terrain around them showed pretty obvious signs of recent slide activity on both sides, like loose soil piled along the edges, displaced rocks sitting in the middle of the path, and broken timber all over the slope above. In a few places, the trail had partially washed out, leaving narrow sections where the footing was genuinely unstable. Roughly 40 minutes past the closure point, a saturated section of the slope above the trail gave way. The slide was not massive, but it was fast, carrying rock, loose mud, and broken timber across a span of roughly 30 feet of trail. The sound came first, her husband later said, a low cracking and then a rushing noise from the slope above that built-in volume, faster than he could process what it meant. Valentina was mid-stride when the leading edge of the debris reached her. She was swept roughly 15 feet downslope and partially buried under loose rock, soil, and a section of fallen timber. Her husband, roughly 60 feet behind, got knocked sideways by the outer edge of the slide but somehow stayed above the surface. He crawled to where she was partially visible and basically just started trying to clear debris from around her head and chest with his bare hands. He called emergency services, but the signal was weak and the call dropped twice before it went through. Rescue teams reached the site on foot roughly 90 minutes later. She was extracted but had sustained catastrophic crush injuries to her torso and pelvis, and the weight of the debris on her chest had prevented her from breathing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her husband was 60 feet behind her when it happened, and he cooperated with everything after, and I keep thinking about what that drive home alone must have been like for him. The trail remained closed for several additional months while stabilization work was completed. The park authority referenced the incident in updated closure enforcement policies and added physical gate barriers at high-risk trailheads. Her husband cooperated fully with the investigation. No legal action was filed. So this next one is the one that I had the hardest time sitting through during research, because the safety briefing she blew off was basically a step-by-step survival guide for exactly what happens to her, and she wasn't paying attention to a single word of it. It was February 18th, 2016, and morning sunlight hit the surface of a glacial river in Chile's Lake District, where it cut through a steep-walled gorge lined with mossy rock and overhanging southern beech trees, the water running a milky blue-green from snowmelt and moving fast enough to hear from the put-in point above. Gemma Thornycroft was 29 years old and worked as a PR coordinator for a mid-sized firm in Bristol, England. She was several months into a long trip through South America with a friend, and the rafting was a last-minute addition booked the night before at a hostel. Her friend later said Gemma pretty much treated safety demonstrations the way most people treat terms and conditions on an app, something to sit through so the actual experience could start. During the pre-launch safety briefing, the guide spent about 10 minutes going through what to do if you fall out of the raft, keep your feet downstream, arms crossed over your chest. Do not try to stand up in the current because your foot can get trapped between rocks underwater. Gemma appeared distracted through most of it, checking her phone a couple times and barely looking at the guide. At one point, she leaned over to her friend and said something that made her friend laugh, and the guide noticed and paused and asked her directly if she had any questions. She told him she was good. 10 minutes of briefing and one body position is all that separated her from walking away from that river, and she couldn't be bothered to look up long enough to hear it? That's what I can't get past. The group launched on a section of river rated Class 3 to Class 4. The first two sets of rapids went fine, and Gemma honestly seemed like she was having a good time from what everyone said. A larger hydraulic feature at the base of a drop caught the front of the raft and kicked the bow upward sharply. Gemma was seated in the front left position, the most exposed seat on the raft, and was thrown forward and out. She entered the water headfirst and surfaced roughly 10 feet downstream. She did not assume the recovery position she had been shown. She was upright in the current, arms flailing, legs pointing downward instead of forward, which is basically the worst possible position to be in. Her left foot lodged between two submerged rocks beneath the surface. The current immediately pinned her body face down with her foot anchored below. The force of the water against her back made it basically impossible for her to lift her head. The guide entered the water within seconds and reached her position, but the current was pinning her with so much force he could not rotate her body or free her foot. A second rafter climbed onto a rock downstream and tried to reach her from a different angle, but the water between them was too fast and deep to cross safely. By the time a throw rope was secured to a tree upstream and enough leverage applied to shift her position and dislodge her foot, she had been submerged face down for several minutes. CPR was started immediately on a rock shelf beside the river. Emergency services were contacted by satellite phone. A rescue team reached the gorge within about 45 minutes. Resuscitation efforts continued, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. A forensic examination later determined the cause of death to be drowning, with foot entrapment in a submerged rock formation documented as the contributing mechanism. Investigators noted that the feet downstream recovery position covered in the briefing is specifically designed to prevent the type of entrapment that occurred. If her feet had been forward and near the surface instead of dangling below her, the entrapment pretty much would not have happened. The rafting company reviewed its safety procedures and added a verbal confirmation step, where each participant had to repeat the recovery position back to the guide before launch. the guide was cleared of all fault. Gemma's friend gave her statement and went back to England. A selfie they took on the raft like 10 minutes before the rapid was still on Gemma's phone when they found it in her dry bag. I chose this last one as the closer because every other person in this video had someone standing right there telling them to stop. But this woman was completely alone on a road that was already known for killing people, and she put herself there on purpose. It was October 9th, 2014, and a thin afternoon rain had turned the unpaved surface of a mountain pass road in the Peruvian highlands into a slick ribbon of red-brown mud where the road cut across a slope at roughly 12,000 feet, with no guardrail and a drop of several hundred feet on the outside edge. Deirdre Stallworth was 52 years old and worked as a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in Denver, Colorado. Super precise, super controlled, and pretty much always the most prepared person in whatever room she walked into. She had planned this whole solo driving tour of the Peruvian highlands herself, with routes mapped out, hotels booked, rental car reserved, weeks ahead of time. The employee at the rental counter later said Deirdre had overruled his route suggestion before he even finished the sentence, told him she had driven mountain roads in the Swiss Alps, and that she didn't need a local driver. When he continued to recommend a different vehicle with better clearance for the mountain roads, she asked to speak with his manager. She left the counter in the sedan she originally booked. The rental guy said he had made the same recommendation to dozens of clients before, and most of them just said okay and took the driver, but she looked at him like he had insulted her intelligence, and that's the detail from this whole story I keep coming back to, because he was a 20-something kid at a rental counter genuinely trying to keep a stranger alive, and she treated him like he was wasting her time. The road she chose was a known high-risk route with a history of vehicle accidents, especially during rainy season when the unpaved surface turned to loose mud and gravel. The switchbacks narrowed to a single lane in places with sheer drops on the outside and no guardrails or barriers of any kind. Locals who used the road regularly knew to honk before blind curves and pull to the inside when passing. By early afternoon, rain had been falling for over an hour, and the surface was honestly getting worse with every vehicle that came through. Tire ruts from earlier traffic had filled with muddy water, making it basically impossible to tell solid ground from soft spots. Deirdre was traveling alone on a switchback section when the vehicle's outside wheels lost traction on wet gravel. The sedan's low clearance and standard road tires had no grip on the slick surface. The vehicle lost traction entering the curve and began sliding toward the outside edge of the road. She appeared to have tried to correct. Investigators found evidence of hard steering input and braking, but on the loose, wet surface, the correction only made the slide worse. The rear wheels went over first, and the vehicle just tipped, rolling multiple times down the steep slope and dropping several hundred feet before it came to rest against a rocky outcropping. The cabin was pretty much completely deformed from the impacts. A passing truck driver spotted the fresh tire marks and damaged road edge roughly an hour later and pulled over to look down the slope. He could see the vehicle far below against the rocks. He contacted local authorities by radio. Rescue teams hiked down to the vehicle, which honestly took over an hour just because of how steep it was. Deirdre was found inside, still partially held by the seatbelt. She was pronounced dead at the scene. A forensic examination later determined the cause of death to be multi-system blunt force trauma consistent with a prolonged vehicle rollover down a steep grade, with injuries to the head, chest, and extremities. The vehicle showed no mechanical failure. The cause was entirely environmental and driver-related. The rental company added seasonal restrictions on certain mountain routes and expanded written hazard disclosures in its agreements. The specific route was flagged going forward with a required acknowledgement signature. Her law firm put out a brief statement. The rental employee's recommendation and her refusal were both documented in the incident file.